Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Welcome to the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm joined by my friend Anica Landreneau, who's with HOK. Been there for almost 11 years. And here on the podcast, we talk to leaders in the green building movement. And I think what I've got to know, Anica, you're a humble leader. Everyone you work with loves working with you, but you volunteer a lot. You're helping direct some of the DC green building codes. And, kind of traveling the world here, helping HOK kind of optimize sustainability. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So take us back and tell us a story. How'd you get into the green building movement? Can you take us back to that time?
Sure. I think I'd personally always been a bit of an environmentalist. Environmental issues were something I cared about. And when I was in design school, I went to architecture school at the University of Houston, and I started to learn metrics about the impact of the built environment on our larger ecology. Things like 3/4 of landfill are full of demolition and construction debris. And at that time, I remember it struck me learning those statistics. This is my industry. This is the profession I'm about to enter. And if I don't do something about it, who will? Right. This is something that I should care about. And so I started to introduce it into my own curriculum. We didn't have specialties and degrees at that time, but just started to have it as an overlay that I brought into my own programs and studio, and something I sort of self-studied throughout school because I wanted to learn more about how I could have a more positive impact through my work.
37% of those taking a LEED Green Associate right now are in high school and college. And probably when you were there, I don't know, was LEED, was that in conversation? It was the early days of LEED. We see it in some universities, or was it just sustainable design? How was that defined?
Yeah, I didn't go to design school until 2000. And so in 2002, I volunteered for the Green Build in Austin. It was down the road from me. Yeah. And I emailed them. I just went to their website and emailed and said, I'm a student. Can I volunteer and go for free? And they said, absolutely.
That's awesome.
And I did it again the next year when it was in Pittsburgh. So I highly encourage students, any conference. I did a solar energy conference, a wind energy conference. I did 2 green builds. Everything I saw that I wanted to attend, I just reached out and said, I'm a student. I'm really interested. Can I volunteer and go for free? You still have to find a couch to sleep on and a way to get there. But you meet so many people who are so excited to have students there. So you have tons of professionals giving you their cards and saying, stay in touch. It's so great that you're here. So I went to Green Build in 2002 and 2003. I had a colleague in school, a classmate, who started studying for the LEED exam, and she really inspired me to also study for it. It was back when there was just one exam, not the associate and the specialty. And so I did take that and became LEED credentialed before I finished my degree, which was a great way of showing employers that I not only cared about sustainability, but that I knew about it, and that is something that I continue to look for when we're interviewing candidates for work at HOK.
So many things in life you don't know unless you ask. So great job at that early green build there in Austin. So Texas, University of Houston, do you have ties to Texas, or how'd you end up down there?
Born and raised in Houston, Texas. I lived there first 28 years of my life until I moved to DC about 12 years ago.
Awesome. So that early LEED credential, and maybe there was some pushback, with sustainability early in your career, that it was a novelty. I think I've heard you say that before. How has that gotten to where you are today, and what are you doing with HOK right now?
So when I graduated and I had my LEED credential, I think a lot of the firms interviewing me thought that was, very cool, but didn't necessarily have a lot of demand in their project work from clients. I always say at that time in Houston, Texas, there were probably a lot more architects interested in doing green buildings than clients interested in hiring architects to do green buildings. So really well-developed green building community there in terms of the different disciplines and contractors, architects, engineers, just not as much demand on the client side. So I joined a firm with just a regular, right out of school, architectural internship job, but I became the green champion. Yeah. I let the firm know I was interested in it. I would do my own brown bag lunches and teach my colleagues about green building principles and ideas and strategies. I helped coach them through the LEED exam.
Nice.
And then when we had a client, a pediatrician, who came to us and said, I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal about green buildings, and my job is children's health. And reading this, I realized this is my facility, my pediatrics facility needs to be a healthy building, a green building. Can you help? And so I got to work on a project, and it was the first privately owned healthcare facility in the state of Texas to get a LEED certification. So that was really exciting to be on the forefront of something in the state, really connecting green buildings to human health, and particularly children's health. And so I always encourage students who are coming out of school, you don't always get the job as the green expert right away, but if you become that green champion and you position yourself as an expert through your own research and leadership, then that position can evolve for you.
So in some offices, maybe small, you have to have that green champion. So you're the default, you're the guru, you're the lead guru. But now, fast forward HOK, you at each office, you kind of have some sustainability, someone focused on sustainability, and then you help guide them. Can you tell us about the structure there?
Sure. So it started when I joined HOK. I was just really, I think, intended to be a DC resource. And we found with a series of federal and local DC legislation that passed in a row year after year that there was a huge demand for increasingly high performance buildings and really metrics and proof that we were going to hit these metrics and making the business case. It was no longer just a thing that felt good. It really, we had to meet substantial requirements in our projects. And so, it quickly became not just me, but a team, and we created a discipline around it, that we're doing deeper dive work into materials research, energy optimization, the cost, balancing peak load reduction and mechanical systems, not just operational costs and payback over time, but first cost balance. We're looking into renewable energy. We're looking into all kinds of different strategies, water systems. And so we pay, it takes time to do that kind of research. And so it's actually a fee that we get paid to do on projects where they have those ambitious goals and targets and requirements that we have to meet and document. So we started a practice in DC and rolled it out across the firm. And so in several larger offices, such as London and New York and San Francisco and Houston and DC, we have folks dedicated to this idea of deeper dive, optimization, and research. And we're touching all of the projects in our studios and outside of our studios. And then beyond that, in every single location, we have champions who may be a full-time PA or an interior designer or a landscape architect, but they help us roll out and implement and engage with their peers in those locations to make sure our programs are really accessible to everyone and the knowledge that we're building is accessible, tools and resources and training, and also feeding back information for things like our AIA 2030 commitments. So we have a touch point in every studio, in many cases, every discipline in every studio, to make sure it's a really well-connected network across the firm.
Well, I can tell you're really proud of what you've been accomplishing at HOK, just all those different disciplines, different building types, and even international reach. So it's just amazing. Talking career, Anica, did you have an early influencer, maybe a mentor that just really helped you earlier in your career?
I think I mentioned I went to a lot of these conferences, and so I had a lot of folks who working at Department of Energy or in design firms who reached out and gave me mentorship. Greg Roberts at WHR in Houston was a great mentor. We were on the education committee for our USGBC chapter back in Houston. And then when I got to HOK, obviously Mary Ann Lazarus, had been with our firm. She was our sustainable design leader for 30 years and really institutionalized sustainable design across our profession. So I wouldn't be where I am without the platform that she built at HOK, but also across the entire design community.
It's so important to go back and thank those that invested time in us to get us to where we are. That's awesome. So you're in D.C., been there for about 12 years. You're active with the new green building codes around D.C. Can you give us a peek to what's coming up? D.C. is one of those cities here in the United States that is a leader with some of the mandates, some of the building codes. Can you give us a sneak peek what's coming up?
Sure. D.C. was one of the first cities to require LEED certification of both public and private sector buildings, and the first jurisdiction to adopt the International Green Construction Code as mandatory for both public and private sector. And for the next code, which we're hoping gets adopted in the first quarter next year, we actually rewrote our energy code. Okay. And so we found that some folks were using 90.1 and some were using IUCC, and the majority were trying to hybridize the two, and it wasn't really effective. And so we wrote our own code with ASHRAE 90.1, Chapter 7 of 189.1, and then additional metrics that we thought were important and ambitious but practical in the DC market. We also moved all of the energy-related issues from the Green Code to the energy code, because in DC you can do the International Green Construction Code or LEED, and we wanted to make sure things like envelope commissioning and dynamic systems commissioning were mandatory for all projects, not just the green code projects or not just the LEED projects. So everyone over 50,000 square feet will have to do envelope commissioning, which is new. And we also lowered the threshold for mechanical commissioning down to 25,000 square feet.
Okay.
And our intent is every 3 years to keep ramping that up. So the envelope commissioning will be unexpected, but we think it's really important. It's the first line of defense for building performance, and it's time. We also wrote a net zero energy appendix. We call it Appendix Z for zero.
Sure.
And the idea is now that that is codified as an appendix, we can start to tie incentives back to it in this code cycle, and eventually, hopefully, get to where that becomes mandatory or we scale up to that. And we're having discussions about, next couple of code cycles, even starting to look at outcome-based energy codes, where you'll have 12 consecutive months to prove your energy performance meets the energy code within the first 3 years of occupancy. And I think, that's really exciting. We'll probably have an early opt-in, voluntary opt-in period for a code cycle before that becomes mandatory. But everything we're doing now is leading up to that direction.
That's some significant work there. You mentioned AIA, the 2030 challenge. I think you've really pushed internally at HOK because you're a senior principal there. You're on the board of directors. You have, some authority, and you're going to be heard within the firm. But, have you made some good progress in the last few years on that challenge? And for those that don't know about it, could you give us the cliff notes? What is that?
Sure. The 2030 challenge is really, Ed Masria started Architecture 2030, and the American Institute of Architects said, let's get our architects, our members, to sign on and make a commitment that they will not only try to achieve a net zero carbon design portfolio by 2030, but they'll actually report back to us every year what's in their design portfolio. Because just like we have benchmarking legislation in dozens of cities now, it's through transparency that you really hold each other accountable to those commitments. And so we signed it in 2010. We were one of the first firms to sign up, and we did our reporting in 2011 and 2012. And we found that, we weren't doing that well. We were at or slightly below the AIA average. And some of that's just bad data. We're not collecting the information. We're not setting our targets early enough. Inconsistencies across the firm with creating baselines and setting targets against those. But, regardless, it meant we could clearly see we needed more discipline around it. We're known for sustainability and high-performance design, and our board of directors really took that as a challenge and said, we're going to do better, And so in 2013, we set our target to be 40% better than the baseline. We hit that in the United States. We didn't quite hit it internationally. We have a lot of projects in China and the Mideast, but we're an international firm, so we reported everything. Okay. But we did set a 45% target in 2014, and we hit it. In 2015, it was a 50% target, and we hit that. And then the next year, 55, last year, 2016, and we hit that, and this year our target 60%. So we should catch up with the 2030 commitment the way it's outlined in 2020, 2021 at an 80% reduction. And then we may even hit, the 100% reduction before 2030 if we keep up with this pace. So we'll see how building technology and renewable energy technology goes, but it's just really about creating rigor in terms of setting targets and benchmarking earlier and more frequently throughout the design process.
And goals are more likely to be hit the more often we talk about them, the earlier we set them. So is it, everyone at the firm really knows, this is a big deal. We're reporting on our progress. It's really ingrained there. You
can't get away from it.
Okay, sure.
We talk about it frequently. Now that we have the DDX platform that AIA and the Department of Energy and EPA created together, you can go on at any time throughout the year and create your project. It takes a couple minutes. And you can find a target if you don't have one. It'll help you set your baseline and set an energy use intensity target. So if you don't know what it should be, you have some help. It's not, a mystery. And then you can go in and update it every time you've run another model and you have an updated EUI number. And so we're pretty regular in terms of nudging people to do that. Our technical leadership across the firm, all PAs and PMs know that that's part of their project responsibilities. And we empower, we don't have one person who does this across the firm. This is every project team has to go in and create their own, project line item and targets and tracking. And then we do a mid-year gut check to see how we're doing. And we reach out to the studios that look like they're struggling. Sure. And we ask them what we can do to help. Because it's not about making anyone look bad. It's giving people the resources and training and tools so they can succeed. And then we'll make sure that we're doing that. We're doing training and engagement and whatever it takes to get the people in that studio to where they have the skills and they feel like they can do what they need to do to meet those goals and exceed them. And so at the end of the year, it takes about 2 or 3 months, December, January, and February, to collect all the data across the firm and validate it and make sure the numbers are accurate and there's nothing wonky.
Sure.
And then it's reported back to the board in March, along with sending it into the AIA. And then we start that over. The studios across the firm that did the poorest, we'll say, are the ones that we really tackle the first half of the year in terms of resources and engagement and training. And then when we do that mid-year gut check, we see where we are, and then we identify the ones that need help for the latter half of the year. So it's a feedback loop. Where do we need to put our investment and resources and time to make sure we have the information we need and the tools we need? But our board members are well aware of it. Every single employee at HOK is well aware of it. We have it on our website.
Sure.
You can see our tracking from 2010 through now. We're very transparent about how we're doing and what the area averages.
You've been very transparent here, talking about some lessons learned and some achievements, so thank you. Is there anything in the last couple of years in this green building movement maybe you've changed your mind on? Did you really, were you stuck on a certain thought, but you're like, you know what, maybe I've changed my mind on something? Does anything come to mind?
I don't think there's anything I've changed my mind significantly, but I think
maybe something got revalidated.
Yeah, we're in a different place than we were back in 2002, for example, when I first got started on this journey. And there's no doubt in my mind that programs like LEAD have transformed the market. They've created demand for things like materials transparency or just knowing, the recycled content. We used to have manufacturers who refused to give us any information, and now they can't stop giving us information about the green attributes of their products and materials. But what I found is there's a little bit of a downside to that clients who aren't participating in third-party certification sometimes feel like it's an all or nothing. And so in some of our markets, we've had clients say, we're not doing LEED, so we don't need an energy model, which I think is really short-sighted. There's lots of reasons to do energy modeling, both for first cost savings as well as long-term savings. It's just how you get a more cost-effective building.
Sure.
And things like WELL is great, but I don't want a client who decides not to pursue WELL certification to say, well, then I don't need to address wellness at all. And the well-being and happiness and health, and I don't need to provide that platform for my tenants or my employees or my stakeholders. So I think it's really important to recognize that these programs are great for moving the market, and they're great instigators, and they help institutionalize things and create a system for recognizing achievement. But sustainability and wellness don't start and end with third-party certification, and we can't limit ourselves as professionals. We can't say the client didn't ask for sustainability or they didn't ask for LEED, so we just didn't talk about it.
Sure.
We're really responsible for where we go. We're supposed to lead our clients. And so especially now with the Paris Agreement, I think, in doubt, it's more important than ever that we take a leadership position and that we do the right thing. And we make sure we optimize that project within its own constraints to the fullest extent that we can. That's our ethical duty, to really do this and not wait for a client to ask for it.
Yeah, and they're not all or nothings, right? So maybe use LEED as a guidebook, even if you don't get that LEED plaque. Use the Well Building Standard as a guidebook for health and wellness, just to influence. We all have our own circles of influence, and if you're an architect or a consultant, you're going to need to influence the client, but not all or nothing. So very good point there. Let's talk a little bit about WELL. We mentioned the Well Building Standard. It's a hot topic. Why do you think it's such a hot topic right now? And I believe at HOK you've got a lot of WELL APs on staff. So what are you doing with WELL? And why do you think it seems like all of a sudden hot topic? However, you mentioned one of your early LEED projects was there focused on health using LEED for the children's facility there. So I know a lot of great architects have been doing healthy buildings for a while, but it's the hot topic right now.
Sure. I think, LEED did a great job of addressing some health issues with indoor environmental quality, access to daylight and view, and good air quality. But there was a lot still on the table that hadn't really been addressed. And I think many professionals connect with the WELL movement or the wellness movement because it is very personal. It's about human interaction with the built environment rather than the built environment's interaction with the global ecology.
Sure.
And so we find across our firm globally that there's a lot of professionals who didn't seem that interested in sustainability, but when wellness came around, suddenly perked up and said, this is really interesting. So it's personal. It touches more on the equity component of the triple bottom line that we sometimes don't hit hard enough in our green projects. And so there's, I think there was a pent-up demand. It's also addressing public health. And we have more and more clients increasingly focused on public health issues. We've obviously seen rise of some diseases like diabetes and obesity and heart disease. And even my clients in the Mideast are very concerned because some of these rates are growing faster than anywhere else in the world. And so we're focusing not just buildings on wellness, but the urban environment, or the public realm, the spaces between buildings, and how we move between those buildings. I think it's great to have a formal program around it now, and it starts to address obviously issues that we didn't touch in LEED, like water quality. Is the water that you should be drinking, is it safe to drink? Our cities have infrastructure, and we saw with Michigan, we've got some challenges with our aging infrastructure. So that's one issue. Things like biophilic design. It's a little squishier. It's not the hard-hitting metrics, but it's that idea that connecting to nature, has a cognitive impact and a real physical health impact and mental health impact. So things like that we just hadn't touched on before. And physical activity, nourishment, access to good food, access to employee assistance programs that can help with some of the personal challenges you might have outside of the job, so that you're a well-balanced person coming into the workplace and trying to get things done. So it's really interesting, and it's intriguing because it does start to go outside of what we have control over as designers. It requires
HR policies.
It requires more integrated conversation with our clients, and hopefully an earlier conversation. It's not just the facilities folks that we're really reaching out and talking to HR and decision makers at that organization.
The business case for well is shifting a little bit too, right? It's not a direct ROI on saving energy, saving water. Maybe it's helping them recruit the best talent, helping them keep the best talent, less absenteeism. So it's a different case study almost on the business side. One
of the markets we're really interested in for well is actually our science and technology market. Okay. We have a lot of higher ed research facilities that we're working on, but also pharmaceuticals, biomedical research. And so these people who are trying to solve cancer, trying to cure diseases and improve, our healthcare industry across the world, providing a platform for greater brain activity and greater genius and greater collaboration might actually help us get to those solutions faster. So, and it's worth a lot of money to them if they can come up with the latest medical device or cancer-fighting drug or HIV-fighting drug. It's profitable for them. And so they want to provide a platform where people have everything they need to be productive and happy and collaborative, so that they can come to those solutions that much more quickly. So it's really interesting. I would not have expected that to be the market that jumped on it as quickly, but it's something that we're seeing the need on the stakeholder side is in unexpected places.
That's so exciting. Just a few more questions. Let's have a little fun about productivity. Do you have a go-to routine or ritual? Earlier we talked about calendar and maybe an Outlook calendar, but what's helped you be successful in your career here?
I definitely live by my calendar.
Sure.
I need to put everything on it. My husband teases me because I put our marriage license appointment on our calendar. I send him an invite to that, make sure we got to the courthouse to get our marriage license on time, and our wedding as well. But it's helpful when you're involved in a lot of different things and you're making sure that you don't miss things. But, I make a lot of notes to myself. I always feel like there's like layers of Post-it notes in my brain that keep trying to remind yourself to do this, and this. My team, we have a weekly meeting to go over all of our projects. We have about 60 that we're working on at any given time, and just quick updates. Where is it? Is it in the same place it was last week? Do I have a deliverable? Is there ability to cross over from one project to the next and share knowledge? I think it's really important that we don't just focus too much on our work, but do give back to the community and the profession. And that's why I do a lot of volunteering with the Green Codes Committee and the Green Building Advisory Council and some national code and AIA committees. It's not enough to respond to the codes as they are today and complain that they don't go far enough or that they don't make sense. It's not enough to respond to just LEED and well, and we should be changing the standards to which we're held in our practice. And so I think it's incredibly important to be engaged in that process. I also try to guest lecture at local universities. I want to keep connected to the students and help them become really smart professionals that help us meet these challenges that we have to tackle. And so I don't always remember everything. I just, mentioned that I had the wrong date on my calendar for a Green Codes breakfast this morning. Sometimes the calendar's not right, but I do my best to get to everything.
Yeah, that's all we can do is our best. But you're right, schedule everything, even personal things. Yep. So that's a good
And make
point.
sure you have time for those personal things.
True. Build in that margin. Just a couple more. Any good books? I listen to a lot of books on Audible, but I don't know if you like paper copy, if you listen to audiobooks, but a recent book you'd recommend?
Trying to think. There's one, it's not that recent, but I really enjoyed, it's called the Great Society Subway. It's the history of the Washington area metro system.
Oh, okay.
It was really fascinating, just the politics, the design. I'm surprised that we got anything done, that we have a metro system at all. Right. But for anyone who's tackled some of those larger, more complex projects, it was a page turner, even though I know how it turned out. I recommend it to everyone. Yeah. That one was really great. And there's another one called Copies in Seconds, and it's the history of Chester Carlson, who invented the Xerox machine. And what was really fascinating to me about it, again, I knew how it ended, but the way that they got there. Yeah. He wanted to be an inventor before he knew what he was going to invent.
Wow.
And then he worked for years trying to create this photocopying machine. Almost went bankrupt. His employees had stock and not a lot of cash, in terms of payment. But when he finally produced it, it was it was huge. It was terribly expensive. They broke down all the time. And so they worked out a lease agreement with companies and said, we'll lease this thing to you, and you'll get up to 2,000 copies a month as part of the lease. And they thought, no one will ever use 2,000 copies a month. And then because they broke down so often, a lot of companies started leasing 2 at a time, so one could always be under repair. And they started doing 2,000 copies a day.
Wow.
And not that the paper waste is a good thing, but what struck me about that book was it said in this case, invention was the mother of necessity. And it makes me think, are there solutions that we haven't created because we don't think there's a demand for them, but if we created them, the demand actually would be there. Yeah. And they had done surveys and asked people, asked Kodak, asked all these, IBM, and everyone said, no, people are okay with their carbon copies, with their mimeograph machines. Sure. Everyone's totally fine with the state of technology. You don't need to do anymore. And the reality is once they come out with something more innovative, everybody wanted that more innovative thing. And so in our world, is there something out there that we're satisfied with, but we should keep pushing the envelope, because if we created something that much more innovative, there would be demand that we haven't even heard of.
Oh, that's thought-provoking. Last question, career advice. Is there something you wish you would have received advice-wise early in your career? What do you recommend for those listening? Maybe they're breaking into the green building movement. Maybe they're making a career change and they're a little more senior in their career, but they're hopping in now. So career advice, maybe green building movement.
One of the things when I was in school, I got involved in a lot of committees. I was on my alumni board before I had graduated. I was on the area committee, the USGBC chapter, and a lot of my fellow classmates said, they just didn't have time. They were in architecture school, they're too busy, don't have time to get involved. And I really thought at the time, you don't have time not to get involved. And because these are the people that are hopefully going to offer you a job, when you graduate, but also people you're going to be working with for the rest of your life. And I think the green building world is actually a very small town. At the end of the day, sure. The relationships I started making 10 or 15 years ago continue to be the relationships that I have today. And some of those folks who may have been an intern are suddenly working for the developer or working for the mayor of New York City, or, there are people who become your partners and your clients that may have just been on a committee next to you a few years ago. And so it's really important to start building your relationships as early as possible. You have to put effort into them. You have to follow up with people you've connected with and do favors for people.
Sure.
Let me make an introduction for you. Let me set up a meeting for you. Because when you do that, it returns to you. Other people open the doors for you and another opportunity. But sustainability is about how all these things are interrelated. All these different factors, the human beings, the built environment, energy, water, land, food, waste, and relationships and the way that we practice are incredibly important to make all those things work synergistically. If we didn't have relationships and everyone handled their work discreetly, we wouldn't be able to accomplish great things. And so relationship building should just never be put aside, no matter how busy you are.
That's awesome. That strikes a chord with me. One of our core values is relationships. And you're right, a genuine let me help you. Zig Ziglar says if you help enough other people in life get what they want, you'll get everything you want. So Anica, thanks for being on the podcast today. This was a lot of fun. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode, and you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast, tell your colleagues, and if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.